We're continuing our walk through the life of Joseph. We'll be in Genesis chapter 41 today if you just want to kind of find your way to where we're supposed to be. Kind of a trivia question if we're ever playing Jeopardy as a church, and the category is Pastor Matt. This is stuff you need to file away on trivia about your pastor. But I have a favorite verse in the Bible. I don't really have a favorite verse in the Bible. I just had to come up with one because people ask you enough, what's your favorite verse in the Bible, that you have to come up with one. I like a great number of the verses in the Bible, as one would who appreciates what God's Word says. But I settled on one many, many years ago that just kind of spoke to my heart where I was as a new believer at 17 or so years old, as I was working through the early parts of my personal faith story. I don't know, I've shared it before, and I didn't know who listens in church. But one day we were in maybe men's Bible study, and Zach Rowan's like, Matt's favorite verse. And I was like, that's a lot of knowledge about your preacher right there, because I don't mention it very often, but it's Job 23:10. If you say life verse or whatever like that. But Job 23:10, Job's life has gone through absolute chaos. He's lost all of his children in tragedies. He's lost his physical health. He's all of his wealth. He was a quite wealthy man, has been destroyed through some sort of divine testing period that he is in. And he has friends that go around him, and they're trying to help him out and try to reason with him and trying to get him to a point where he can accept where he is. And there's a whole lot going on there. And Job is responding in Job chapter 23, and he says this of God. He says, God knows the way that I take. And when he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. And I just love that about Job. He's in the hottest, roughest season that anyone could imagine. The worst time that anyone could ever go through. And he says, look, when God knows me, and he knows where I'm going, and he knows the path that I'm taking, and when he's done testing me, I'm going to come forth as gold. It's like he's being refined in the fire. The truth is, if you were to go and dig a hunk of gold out of the side of a hill somewhere, you'd say, man, this is worth a lot. This gold in my hand is worth a lot, but it's basically just a rock at that point. But when you put it in the fire and you melt away all the things that aren't gold in it, and you scrape away the stuff that doesn't belong, and you continue that process. And as that goes forward, the gold becomes more valuable, and it becomes more useful. And Job was in the middle of that, and he said, look, I'm going to come forth as gold. I don't know where you are right now in your personal struggles in your life, but I do know this, that God uses testing and trials throughout our life to form us into useful and valuable parts of his kingdom. And we cannot short-circuit that path. We want to short-circuit that path. I'm sure that the hunk of gold that's mixed with all the other ores that are inside of it, and when it gets thrown in the fire, if it was to have feeling, would say, this does not feel good. I'm good as I am. I'm pretty happy as I am, as a hunk of gold mixed with copper and iron and tin and everything together. I'm pretty happy as I am. The flames hurt a little bit. Maybe we don't need all of this fire after all. But the more it goes through, the more refined it becomes, the more valuable it is, and the more useful it is. We're looking at the life of Joseph, a man who is in the midst of his own trials. He's currently in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He had been sold into slavery into a country he didn't know anything of. His whole life, the last 30 years of his life, has been just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. And for 30-ish years, he's been sitting in the fire. And the last thing that we picked up at the end of our last time together, he had just interpreted these dreams for the cupbearer and for the baker of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And he told the cupbearer, whose dream was basically told him that he was going to be restored to the Pharaoh. He said, look, when you go back to the Pharaoh, don't forget about me. I don't belong here in this pit. I should not be locked up in this prison. Mention me to Pharaoh. Secure my freedom. And immediately, as we see in verse 23 of chapter 40, it says, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Right? And that just feels, as I said last week, it just feels unjust that that's the way this story ends. And then we pick up in verse 1 of chapter 41, and this is how it begins. After 2 whole years, 730 days, he continues to sit and rot in that prison. Totally forgotten. And guys, I'm going to tell you something. There is a lot of times in the Bible that we have years of people's lives washed away in short sentences. You know, Moses goes off to Midian after leaving Egypt. Then he spends 40 years in Midian. We know about 3 things that happen before the burning bush begins to talk. And 40 years of Moses' life is just brushed over in an instant. Paul goes down to Arabia for 3 years. It's just brushed over in an instant. Christ himself, right? We have the birth of Jesus, and then we have like early teenage-ish Jesus for like 2 verses, and then we've got nothing till we have full-grown 30-year-old Jesus. And we look at these gaps in our heroes of our faith life, and we say, why isn't something going on? Well, what could the biblical writer tell us about what was happening in this period, what's going on in the prison? But you know, there's nothing going on in the prison from Joseph's perspective. Every day is the same, right? You get up, you do whatever it is that's required, you go to bed, and you do it again and again and again. It doesn't sound all too different than work, to be honest with you, right? You get up, you go to the office, you go to the job site, you do the thing for as long as you have to do the thing. You come home, you go to bed, you look forward to the weekend. The weekend comes, you're too tired. So then Monday comes and you get up and you do it again and again and again. 40 years passes away. And we look at these times of monotony and boredom and we say there is nothing happening, but you don't know what's going on. We don't see the full picture of what's happening in that time period when our lives are stuck in a holding place. God is preparing situations. He's preparing things to be done so that we can step into those moments. And Joseph didn't know that he needed those 2 years in prison. And in those 2 years in prison, God continued to refine the character of Joseph. Continue to melt away the impurities in Joseph's life. Continue to make him and mold him and shape him through this tough season. You may feel forgotten right now. There may be something that you absolutely desire or that you absolutely feel as if is owed to you. You have worked for that spot. You have served to that capacity. You have earned that responsibility. Maybe you feel like that. I want you to know, if that's true, and you're in a holding place, that middle place, the waiting room of the doctor's office, though for some reason now the doctor's room is the waiting room as well. That's a weird game, right? You go into the doctor, sit here, right? And they're like, okay, you get your room. You're like, awesome, I'm going to go see the doctor. No, you're not going to see the doctor. Just sit there again, right? I don't understand the second waiting room. But some of us, we're on like our 15th waiting room for something we're waiting on God to deliver. We're just waiting. We're waiting for the someone or the something or the some task, and we're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and we feel like we keep getting moved from room to room to room, and at the end of it, we're like, is the doctor ever coming? He is. After 2 years, Joseph waiting in prison, after 30 years of Joseph being sold into slavery into Egypt by his own kinfolk, after being in prison for a great number of those years, after 2 whole years, verse 41, chapter 41, verse 1 says, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. And then he fell asleep again, and he dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. See, here's what you don't know when you're stuck in the waiting place. You don't know that somewhere someone is having something happen in their world, and you are being prepared to step into it. Or this is roughly, it says 2 whole years, so this is day 730 since the cupbearer has left Joseph, with no sign of remembering him at all. And on that night, when Joseph is dreaming his normal dreams that he had, the Pharaoh had a nightmare that kept him up. Thin cows eating fat cows, and thin grain eating fat grain. And he wakes up to it and he says, I don't understand this. And he brings in his magicians and his wise men, and these are the experts of the time. I mentioned last week that dream interpretation was a big thing in Egypt. There were men who were tasked with understanding to be able to interpret those dreams. And so Pharaoh brought all of the best men, the top men, as we say, brought those top men in and said, hey, come, interpret this dream for me. But none of them could. Right? But by God's divine providence, none of those men could, and none of them would even offer a bogus explanation. Like if you were to go to a tarot card reader and they were to tell you your future, they're not going to be like, I don't know, because that's just garbage. Right? They're going to be like, I'm going to make something up right now to tell you to keep you happy so you'll come back later. Don't go to tarot card readers, by the way, in case you're wondering. Well, not that's a good thing for you to do. It is not. Dancing with the occult is a bad way to go through this life, okay? No one can do it. And then, verse 9, the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the baker in custody and the house of the captain of the guard. And we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. And there was a young Hebrew who was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. And when we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. 2 years go by since the cupbearer left. He had totally forgotten about Joseph. His attendant, the man who cared for him while he was in prison, had totally forgotten about him. But in this moment, the recollection came back. Pharaoh's troubled by a dream. I don't know. No one can interpret. No one can interpret it. The cupbearer walks. He's like, I might know a guy. I might know a guy who can do this. Now, you're Joseph in this story. You're sitting in the waiting place. You're stuck in the pit, and you don't know that in the halls of power, in the ear of the most powerful man in that kingdom and possibly in the world, your name is being mentioned in that spot. Guys, here's why we don't short-circuit God's plan for our lives. This is why we should not rush ahead of where God wants us to be, because God's plan for our life is bigger than oftentimes what ours is. Joseph's plan, as he told the cupbearer, was mention me to the Pharaoh so I can get out of this pit. Joseph's plan was just to obtain a look at the sun on a regular basis. I don't deserve to be here. I was sold. I'm not even from here. Get me out of this pit. Please remember me to the Pharaoh to get me out of this pit. But God's plan for Joseph was bigger. God's plan for Joseph was to bring him before the Pharaoh, to elevate him. Guys, you don't know what God's plan is for your life, but I promise you, if you go about it your way, you will short-circuit the blessings that God is intending to give to you. And I don't know how many times I've run in front of God in my life trying to orchestrate things to the ends that I want. right? Acting in my own knowledge and my own strength and my own power and my own wisdom, when oftentimes sitting back and trusting that God has a plan is what's needed. And so for 2 years, Joseph sat waiting for this day, for his name to be remembered, for the Pharaoh to have a nightmare that he can't fathom, and for the cupbearer to remember him. So what did the Pharaoh do hearing of this man? He says the Pharaoh, verse 14, sent and called Joseph. And they quickly brought him up out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. He did prepare himself to meet the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. But Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. What a wonderful, wonderful shine of the character of Joseph that's been being developed. Right, the Pharaoh brings Joseph in. He says, I've heard that you can interpret dreams. I've heard that you have a gift. You hear a dream, you interpret a dream. You. Guys, when people tell you about how good you are, it feels good inside. Right? When people tell you, man, you are smart and good looking and you're clever and oh my goodness, you're so funny, right? It feels good. And Joseph is getting his ego stroked by the most powerful man in the world. I hear you can do this. I hear you've got this gift. I hear you can do it. Is that right? Can you do this? And he's like, no, I can't do that. Joseph humbly says, it's not in me. I don't have the strength to do it. I don't have the wisdom. Like the Pharaoh had magicians and wise men. And Joseph's like, I'm not those guys. I haven't read all the books and studied all the things and figured out. I have a book in my house. I was a psych major. Some of you may or may not know that. And so I have a book of dreams interpreted, which follows Carl Jung's general theory of dream interpretation. I find it to be bogus, but it's pleasant to look at sometimes. And so it's like 1,001 dreams interpreted. So if you have a dream and you want to know what some follower of Carl Jung might say it was, I can give that to you, okay? Again, I find it to be pretty much bogus. But, right, like Joseph didn't have that book. He hadn't read all the current literature on dream interpretation and symbolism. He didn't understand that, everything is a problem with your father from your childhood or something like that. He didn't know any of this stuff. And so he says, I hear you can do this. He's like, I can't do it. See, in those 30 years since he was with his brothers, God had been refining Joseph down. And he had been scraping off the dross of pride and selfish ambition and all the things that are naturally inside of us. And year after year after year, those things were scraped aside so that when it had an opportunity to rear its ugly face, it was not in Joseph anymore. He didn't have any selfishness. I can't do it. He says, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Immediately, he turns from himself, turns glory back to God. So Pharaoh shares the dreams with Joseph in detail, the same detail. I'm not going to read it for you, so pick up with me in verse 25. It says, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Who has revealed? God has revealed. 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are the 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. There will come 7 years of plenty throughout the land of Egypt, but after that there will rise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Right, so he gives the interpretation, and again, he's saying God, 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 right? Right, his whole understanding comes from God. Right, in this language that he uses to say, God has shown the Pharaoh, God is going to do, right? He's teaching the Pharaoh good theology, the Pharaoh who is steeped in all sorts of Egyptian nonsense worship. He himself, likely at this time, worshipped as some form of a god. He's like, the God. The God. Not one of your gods, not the river, not the sun. God has shown you. God is going to do. God will provide. And so he says it's going to happen soon. And so he gives Pharaoh some advice. He says, let Pharaoh, verse 34, proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years and gather all the food for these good years that are coming up and store the grain under the authority of Pharaoh for the food in the cities and let him keep it. The food will be reserved for the land against the 7 years of famine that are occur in the land of Egypt so that the land may not perish for the famine. He says, so what you're going to do is during these 7 good years, you are not going to eat everything that you make. You know, we do this, by the way, we're naturally spendy people, right? You get a raise, all of a sudden you look back at the end of the year, you're like, I thought I got a raise. And I have no more money in my bank account today than I did when I started. What happened to that money? Right? Like someone hands you money and then it just walks away. You walk into Walmart, right? I saw poor Rob Castillo shopping in Walmart. He had a basket full. He had to take out a mortgage. I mean, it is tough out there right now. I mean, it is hard out there. I go every day, so I don't understand big purchases anymore. If you want to meet your pastor and you just hang out again at Walmart, you'll find me. I'm there. I saw Johnny. I see everybody there at some point, so you just look for me there. I'll be there. Right, but we're naturally kind of spendy. And during times of great plenty, the people were more likely to eat all of their food. And just said, you can't do that because there's going to come bad years. So we're going to put some aside every harvest. We're putting food aside, so that when the bad years come, your people will be able to eat. That's what you should do, Pharaoh. He just gave him some advice. He's like, this is what I would do if I was in charge, which I'm not. This is probably what you should do, though, Pharaoh. And verse 37 says, the proposal pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Right, Joseph has been teaching Pharaoh theology. God is going to do this. God is going to do this. God has shown you. And then the first time Pharaoh speaks after hearing this, he uses Joseph's words. He's been taught. He's like, can we find someone with the Spirit of God in him? I'm not saying Pharaoh's a believer. He likely is not going to become a believer in the promise of the Messiah, right? But in that moment, he understood that there was a God bigger than any of the gods that he had been dealing with, and he's looking for someone who's filled with his Spirit to organize this thing. He says, is there anyone here who has the fullness of the Spirit of God? And this is the point where Joseph could have just taken like a half step forward and been like, hey, that's me right here. You know, the guy who just told you the dreams and what God said, like, I'm the guy filled with the Spirit of God. So appoint me to lead in this area. That's me. Do it for me. Right? That's oftentimes what we do. We lay out the problem, we lay out the solution, and then we are the solution at the end of it. And you need me. Right? I'm the service that you need to purchase right now. Joseph didn't do that. Instead, Pharaoh looked around, read the room, and he said to Joseph, verse 39, since God has shown you all of this, there's none as so discerning and wise as you. You will be over my house. All my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. He clothed him in garments of fine linen, put a gold chain about his neck, and he made him ride in his second chariot. That's Air Force 2, in case you're wondering. And they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one will lift up a hand or foot in the land of Egypt. Guys, this is insane. That morning was day 730 of Joseph being forgotten about in prison. That morning, Joseph had a big old bushy beard. Joseph had tattered clothes. He was going to eat the same gruel that he had every day. He was going to stare up and try to find a glimpse of the bright light in the sky, whatever he did to pass his time as he waited for the next day and the next day and the next day. But that day was the day when God was ready to pluck Joseph from his spot of waiting and put him into action. Now, he did not know what was coming. Guys, you don't know if today is your day. Right? If you've been waiting for a long time, if you've been in a season of waiting and you're just there and stuck, you don't know today could be that day. This week could be that day. Are you ready for that day? Or have you been too busy trying to short circuit the work of the refiner? Have you been trying to get out of the fire and not let your character be refined? Have you been actively trying to fix all the problems yourself without relying on God fully and completely? Guys, are you ready for God to pluck you from your period of waiting? Joseph was ready. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He didn't know why he was waiting, but we see his character was fully refined. And that was the day when he went from a prisoner with a big bushy beard and tattered clothes to a man second in command of the most powerful country in the world. Riding in the chariot of the king with the king's servants around him, telling every common person he goes by to bow the knee to this guy because he is in charge. This man who was in prison 6 hours before this is now the second most powerful person in the world. Guys, when God chooses to pluck us from our time of waiting, right, we couldn't draw that story. Like, he can just elevate us to positions that we had no idea were available. Joseph didn't know second in command was waiting for him. He was just stuck, waiting. And when the Pharaoh put his signet ring on him, that basically gave Joseph the ability to make laws. It gave Joseph the ability to spend money of the Pharaoh. He could go into any place and he could charge it to the Pharaoh's account. Right? He had access to everything, and it all happened because he stood waiting, and God was waiting for Joseph to be ready. He was preparing Joseph for this time of plenty and for the famine that was to come, because he had a purpose for Joseph's life, and Joseph didn't know it. He didn't understand it. He had a dream when he was a kid that told him something about him was supposed to be special. But he had no idea what it was going to look like. He had no idea the route it was going to take to get there. But God saw that route. Guys, God sees your route. That's what I love about Job 23. Right? God knows the way that I take. He knows the path that I'm on. He knows the path that you're on. He sees the way that you take. You're not some anonymous person in the kingdom that God has no care for. God sees you. He knows your path. He knows the path that you're on. He knows the path that he wants you to be on. He knows you. And you're being tested and tried. And some of the tests that you have walked through break my heart. It's just absolutely shattering tests. Health, marriages, families, the things that just drive us into the deepest places. A.W. Tozer once said that I doubt greatly that God will use a man, or woman in this case, greatly, who he has not broken greatly. We don't want to be broken. It hurts. It's miserable. It's in those times of brokenness that we find ourselves relying back on the providence of God. And if you'll walk through the period of brokenness, and you'll sit through the time of waiting, and you'll sit in the fire of being refined, he knows the way that you take. And when he is through testing you, dear Christian, you'll come forth as gold. You'll be valuable, and you'll be useful. If you hop out of that fire prematurely, they can't make anything out of you. You're a hunk of raw good that through a little bit more time could have been something. But now you're just an expensive paperweight. Guys, I'm encouraging you to stay in the fire. Just walk. You know, there's my wife went to a Christian school, First Baptist Academy, and they were the Eagles. Go Eagles. And they took it from the verse, right? We'll mount up on wings like eagles and soar. Right? What a wonderful verse that is. You know. But the next part of the verse is we'll run and not grow weary, and that's pretty cool too, right? Because like if you get me running, I've been to some charismatic churches. Like I could probably make 2 laps, and then I'm done. Right? But run and not grow weary. What a cool thing that is. Mount up on wings like eagles and soar. And then after that, it's like they'll walk and not faint. And guys, I think the Christian life is often that. We want it to be mounting up on eagle's wings. Man, we want to be soaring. We want to be over it all. We want to be, woo! That's what we want. And it's rarely that. You say, well, I'll settle for the good pace run. Just get me in there, run and not grow. I'll settle. Man, that's good. I'll run. Man, a lot of times it's walking without fainting. You may feel like you're going to faint. You may feel like the brokenness that you're experiencing, the trials that you're going through, the suffering that you're walking through, that it's going to break you. But God says that you will walk and not faint. Just keep walking. Because you don't know what God has for you tomorrow. You know, I was 15 years old, and I didn't know what God had for me. I grew up in church, went to church all the time. Just a normal guy, and it was on that day that God smiled down on me and revealed in my heart that I was lost in sin with no relationship with Him. I didn't know. I woke up that morning. It was like I think it was a Sunday night crusade thing, so I knew we were getting up. We were going to church. We were going to go to church that evening. Like I knew what we were doing, but like it was just another day. It's the millionth time I've been to church. There was nothing special about that day. There was nothing about that day that would have warned me for what was going to happen when a guy got up and shared the gospel, which I had heard and I had shared for the last 15 years of my life. I remember as a first grader sharing the gospel to kids on the playground. Right? Like I remember. Right? Like, so I knew the gospel quite well, but it was on that day that God revealed to me that it's not about what you know. It's not about where you go to church. It's not about all of the things that you've already done. It's do you believe today in salvation? It was on that day that God broke my heart. And for the last 25 years, 27 years, 26 years, whatever it is now, He's been shaping me in the fire. And I'm not done yet. I still walk through the fire. And I still want to get out of it sometimes. But today could be the day that God says you're ready for that thing. The thing that you wanted, the thing you desire, the thing that God laid in your heart, but just never happened for some reason. And He could be delivering that to you today if you're ready. Stay in the fire, church. I'm glad Christ stayed through the fire. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Sweat drops of blood. Praying, let this cup pass, but if it's not possible, not my will, but your will be done. And He went to the cross to die for my sins and your sins. And He did that because He stayed in. He could have called out angels to deliver Him. He was taunted to do so. He did not do that. He walked the path that was in front of Him for us and ultimately for Him as well, as He was raised from the dead, glorified in front of the disciples, and is now seated at the right hand of the Father. Guys, we serve a beautiful Savior who walked through the fire. He demonstrated us what it looks like. Walk through it today. And if you're in a time of waiting, that's okay. It's okay. And if you've been moved to the 58th waiting room, hunting the doctor, it's okay. Keep walking. He'll sustain you, even when you think you can't take another step. Let me pray.